You're listening to the Vacation Rental Key with T&T, the podcast for vacation rental managers by vacation rental managers. I'm Tim Cafferty, and I manage two companies, one in Virginia and one in North Carolina. And I'm one of the two T's.
And I'm the other T, Tiffany Edwards, born and raised in the vacation rental business. I help manage our family businesses from Key West all the way to Kauai.
In the next 30 minutes, we're going to give you our keys to success in the vacation rental business. We're back, and we're ready to lay some more information on you. I'm Tim.
And I'm Tiffany.
Tiff, what's the best thing that happened to you since we've gotten together last?
Oh, well, I've gotten so much great feedback of our last couple podcasts and slowly getting on to social media and being able to talk to everyone. You know, we talk a lot about what's going on in our industry within our office, but it's nice to be able to put it out there and have other feedback. So really fun.
I would say the same. We see you guys out there listening to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Amazon Music, and there's an app called Podcast Addict that a few of you are using. But I think more interestingly, when I was looking at the deep dive on the statistics, is there's some people listening to us at work, Tiffany. I see people listening on the computers, so we won't tell anybody that you have that extra window open, but we're glad you're listening and glad you joined us again today.
I think that just means they're highly productive. They're working and bettering business at the same time.
That's
efficiency.
Exactly right. So we're going to better your business even more today. We teased it last time. Today we're going to talk about owner communication. A lot to that. We touched on it a little bit last time. We talked about the whole importance of onboarding that owner and the whole solicitation and making sure it's a good fit so you don't have those problems that we talked about and you don't have to go through those no's and nevers. We're going to talk a lot more today about maintaining that relationship with the owner, but when we talk about communicating with the owners, that's what we're going to be doing today and the importance of that. And I don't think there's a more important thing that we do.
There isn't, Tim. And the owner in itself is the bread and butter of our business. And we a lot of times have software that we focus on the communication with guests and not necessarily that personal touch point with owners. And so it cannot get lost because we have to make sure that they're a priority in the business.
As we go over those points, I think one of the things that comes to mind is you really set the standard on your communications before you begin that relationship with the owner. As you have gone through that solicitation process and you bring that owner on board, the manner in which you reached out to that person to woo them, so to speak, really becomes the standard. And so you need to really make sure you get that straight right up front. What is the expectation on communication? And the key to that, I think, is asking. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. That you need to set it up not only in the mindset of what they need, but what also you can provide and deliver from your team. And so to make sure that that really truly aligns, I think we spend a lot of our time talking about what all we can do and excited about the opportunity to onboard that owner. But a lot of times we're not necessarily listening to exactly what they want. And Tim, I think you have a really great method that you follow when asking what the owner wants, because there are different categories of owners and the way that you need to communicate with them.
There really are. And it goes back to our friend John DeJulius, who was on previous podcast of mine that came on many times, and great motivational speaker and a guy who really does some super coaching for businesses. If you don't know about what he does, you ought to look him up. John DeJulius, DiJuilius. And so they do a great job, but he taught me the Ford method. And I think many of you have heard about the Ford method, that you focus on the family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. If you ask questions surrounding those and then take notes on that, what a great start to any conversation you have with an owner. Oh, how is Elizabeth? Or those two kids out of college yet? Or, hey, when's the last time you went parasailing? those kinds of things. And then having a process where you can really note those things. And one of the things you find out when you start doing that is you find that the guy is a neurosurgeon and doesn't take phone calls on the cell phone. And please don't call me about the broken coffee maker. Those were really important things to note early on.
Yeah. And, we do the same thing in how we kind of categorize, because we also look at it as, is it a financial investment? And so do they want just communication through their statements? Do they want just communication through texts and emails and written records? We have one owner who every time we get on the phone, it's a 90-minute phone conversation, and he wants to analyze every choice and he wants to be a part of it because he wants to be a partner in it. And then, through that Ford method, you can also place the category of this is their absolute dream. This is their retirement, and they're so tied to this home. And so they want all the lamps to be exactly in the same way when they return. And noting some of that information is really important, not only in how you communicate, but how you continue the conversation later on.
I think it's really important. You just used a word there that I try not to use. It starts with an H. We call it the H word around here. Whenever I talk to a property owner and they describe the property as their home, that's a red flag to me. Because as Stephen Craig, a voice and name from the past that some of you may remember, taught me long ago, that when that property owner decided to take the first dollar for rent, it no longer was their home. It became a commercial domicile. And so you have an immediate education opportunity to let them know, this is probably not going to be as you think it is. These folks are going to come in, they're going to respect your property, but they're not going to treat it like your home. If you can manage that, that's great. As you were saying, Tiffany, you know who those property owners are and you can cater to that. But if you're not equipped for that, it may not be a good fit. And some of the best partnerships you have are the ones you never enter into.
Going back to the early conversations, you cannot oversell yourself. If you're not equipped to handle that or don't have people on your team, you cannot set up the relationship with an overpromise and based on what your bandwidth and your limitations are.
Remember that Ford method, and then have a way to capture that in your property management software, or maybe you have a CRM software of some sort that you can put those things in there. So not only you know that information, but whomever may be talking to that property owner may also be able to look and easily reference that this, that, or the other is important when dealing with these owners. And then, of course, as you related before, the method in which we communicate. Like, again, my neurosurgeon, I don't call him. He doesn't want to be called. He wants a text, and he will get back to me at the appropriate time. But you do have others who want a phone call about whatever. And it could be a different threshold that they want to call about than what you have. And so that's important to note. And then, of course, email is always a way to communicate. But I would say the most important thing about communications and how to communicate with them is what happens when there's an emergency and you can't reach them. Do you have some sort of communication set up that I'm happy to try to contact you in this manner, in this manner, in this manner, but there may be a situation where if I can't get a hold of you, this is how I'm going to operate. So that is also owner communications, don't you believe?
That's so important on the front end. And you have to really set the expectation that in emergency situations, first of all, set your parameters of what emergencies constitute, right? Because if they're out of the area, an AC is an emergency, no matter what. An AC is an emergency. Well, I guess I shouldn't say in some locations, but for all of our locations, it's an emergency, needs to be dealt with. If they're not answering the phone, they need to understand that we're going to have to make a decision for their property and for that reservation. And then if we can't make that decision, what that discount must look like. And that information has to be discussed at the very beginning, but also the owner has to know what their responsibility is. They have to pick up the phone or have to be able to timely respond. And they have to be a good partner in this.
The worst scenarios are when you need that owner approval on something and they can't give it to you, and you've got a guest literally twisting in the wind, waiting to have that compressor replaced on the air conditioner or the outdoor condensing unit or whatever that's going to be $5,000. And you want to make sure at least you have some buy-in before you do it, because nobody wants to pay that bill on their own. You want to make sure that you have that understanding. But again, that whole thing to me goes back to trust. And that's what we're trying to build from the start. And you mentioned it a couple of times about not over-promising. make sure you can build that trust and gain that point of the relationship where they get a call or they get a text or whatever from Tim or from Tiffany or from whomever, fill in your name here. They know it's an emergency and they trust that we're going to make the best decision we can on their behalf. And if you got that, you're golden on communication.
Well, Tim, another thing too, as we're talking about this, I also know pretty well, or our team knows pretty well, some of our owners who won't immediately say yes, that they're a little bit more price conscious. So they have to know, one, that I'm working with a preferred vendor on a specific situation. Or number two, I know that I have to have multiple bids for them. They won't even look at it, the first bid. They'll immediately say, I want to look at something else, or this may be too high. And some of that also depends on what type of economic climate you're in. If reservations are coming in and they see a lot on the books, they're a little bit easier to say yes to things. But if we're in a different economic time, I can usually pinpoint, or our team can pinpoint, the owners that are going to need a little bit more love and encouragement to make some decisions, emergency or not.
So maybe we could change forward that last D. Instead of dreams, we can change that to details. The details. Right?
Details. So, write them down.
For sure. Call this owner about everything. I always have a story, and I can't help but think when I first started in the business years ago, I had an owner that lived in Charlottesville, Virginia, and their property was in Duck, North Carolina, probably 4 hours with no traffic. And so I called them about their coffee maker because he wanted, on the details, wanted to know everything. And I won't mention his name, but Mr. Gorman, your coffee maker is broken. And so we're going to get it replaced. And his response was, I'll be right there. He drove from Charlottesville, Virginia to deliver a new coffee maker. I don't think we really established the trust with him quite yet at that point.
Some others have that personality. They want to be part of every single decision. And those are difficult, but you can build a relationship where they start to build understanding and trust that you know what you're doing.
Yeah. Amen. Okay, so let's now talk about the maintaining of the relationship. There's a variety of communications that we can use on a day-to-day or at least monthly basis. And we'll call this the aspirational section of our podcast.
This is absolutely the aspirational. This is everything that I wish myself and our team could do. And we start off every year saying, this is what we're going to do. And then 4 months after the due date, we get something out. So we're going to start with aspirational.
Yes. So the first thing I would say on an aspirational thing would be a newsletter. We all say, yeah, that would be a great idea. I'll just throw this stuff out there. It's a good opportunity for me to let owners know what's coming down the pike and what we're doing for them and whatever. So how often do you do it? Do you do it annually, semi-annually, quarterly, monthly? I'm raising my hand.
Yeah.
It is probably the least popular thing that I ask of my staff, but I have my department heads submit an article for our newsletter every month, and we send it out religiously by the 10th. And so our owners are, if they read, up to date on whatever the latest effort is here.
So I think the cadence is aspirational, but the newsletter is a non-negotiable. So it's very important. And I said this, I think, on our last podcast, that we don't do a really good job of self-promoting. And part of this maintaining the relationship is keeping that home and building the trust. And a newsletter, whether your cadence is a little different, the information builds that trust and the professionalism of what you provide. And it helps market yourself some. Our newsletter, I will say, we like to do it quarterly. It does not always look that way. Sometimes it's semi-annually, but our goal is always quarterly, and we do it a little bit differently. So we do have department heads, but we also try to really look at similar topics. So it's no surprise to a lot of people who know me, we always have a regulation aspect in there because it's important to know for owners that we're not only a part of the community, but we're constantly watching compliance and overseeing some government involvement to protect their property and their asset. We always have trends in there about bookings data nationally and then drive it down to our local market. And then we have some feel good pieces, but we usually have topics. So at least it helps direct some of our department heads and it creates continuity from each newsletter, whether we get it out quarterly or semi-annually.
It's great because I was going to ask you what kind of content you have in there. I think what go-to answer number one when you go to a department head about that is, well, I don't really have anything to say. But the fact is, owners do want to know that kind of stuff, what you just talked about. How are reservations going? Are they ahead of last year? Are they behind last year? Are you seeing more OTA bookings? Are you seeing more direct bookings? Are you getting phone calls? That kind of stuff they eat up. And then for maintenance, what's going on in maintenance? We just started a program this year where we're selling gas grills. And it's been widely accepted and it's below market pricing and owners are loving it. And so there's always something going on. And when you step back and go, well, yeah, maybe they like to know about this. So don't undersell yourself. You definitely can come up with a couple of hundred words in a department.
I just recently, we did an owner newsletter for one of the businesses and the individual that I had set it up sent me back last year's spring newsletter. So probably not going to work for this year. Might need to make some tweets.
Yes, right.
Do that.
The thing I love is when I ask them for the newsletter article and I get it and I'm like, did you write this or is this Chat GPT? Because I have never heard you speak like this in my life.
So verbose.
Yes. Oh my God. You have never used that word in your life. So yeah, maybe a little editing there for personality. So newsletter, I think we would flog that horse. But another one is many of us send owner statements on a monthly basis. It's a great opportunity they're typically done by email, right? Fire it out of your system and you can usually put some sort of an introductory message there with the email and you might highlight some things going on. Maybe there's a future event happening in your area or you're getting ready to send out contracts for next year or remind them about whatever service that you have that's available to them at this point. The owner statement's often overlooked as a great opportunity to communicate with your owners.
Absolutely. And you know that the owner is going to be looking at it. So it's a very quick way to put a touch point to an owner. And I think it's completely underutilized in the market.
Another one I had on my list as far as communication, I'll go back to my friend Sarah Bradford, who did this religiously, and I have to give her credit for this. She would do a twice a year market update specific to the property, including it with a newsletter, but it was actually a breakdown on the performance of the property over the last 6 months and where it stood versus the market. That one blew my mind and made me step back and go, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. But people loved it. And it really made that bond between the owner and the company solid. And you just talked about the fact you do that on a more regular basis, but drilling it down to their specific property is really cool.
Yeah, those are, again, that's so aspirational. We try to do that on select homes and owners that we know that we have already categorized that need a little bit more. Owners that are also have properties that are very high profitable. We try to select those and do reports like that for those individuals.
The other thing I think we don't take advantage of a lot, just we being the generality of those in the vacation rental industry, is the visitation of the owner at their property. While they're there, how about an in-person meeting? Whether you go to the property and spend a half an hour or invite them by the office, those in-person meetings can just really solidify everything that is going well in the relationship.
And I think that, again, that is completely underutilized. It is so important to get in front of an individual. And even when you have to pick up a phone as opposed to an email, for some of those that may want a phone, may be open to a phone call, getting in front of someone face to face helps build that relationship and the connectivity between a property manager and the owner. It's a little bit more buy-in. Also, if you're in their home, it just helps. Again, you have some eyes into the property. Not always can you do this, but one of the things that we do in some of our locations is we do a welcome gift for some of our owners. So some fresh bread from a local bakery, put in some water bottles. So when they come in, they have something for the next morning, and then have a little handwritten note. So if we can't do a in-person meeting, we have a little touch point where they know that we're thinking about them, we're welcoming them, and we're a part of their family and a partner in this process.
Great. My takeaway from that is Tiffany treats her owners like prisoners. She gives them bread and water. Yeah, that's great. Good. The other thing I thought about with the in-person meetings is they are more relaxed in that environment. Now, it's another day at work for you, but they may open up about something that they wouldn't on the telephone. For instance, we had a meeting today. Our owner acquisition and administration team meets with our owners either by Zoom or in person, but came to find out as we were talking to this property owner, they're ready to get out of the business. They're ready to sell their property. I don't know that that would come up if we weren't there in person. And that's good to know. Another thing on the forward, selling the property. And so you need to position yourself appropriately for that as well. So those in-person meetings can uncover a lot more things than just how's life going.
Agreed.
How about an annual report? I used to do that. It was like a full-on using my journalism degree to the nth, where I would talk about the market for the entire year. And it's an annual report on the company. This is how we performed. And this is how the market performed. I guess you touched on that in your newsletters, but an annual report is something I've heard about as well.
Don't do an annual report unless we're specifically asked. Again, it becomes a little bit more aspirational. I would love to be able to do that, but for our bandwidth and our locations, we just haven't been able to make that a regular part of our process. We try to utilize those newsletters and anything that they would ask specifically, and then our annual report becomes the booking revenue reports for those individual homes potentially at the end of the year, more so if they're asked.
I think my annual report now, it would just be basically a P&L statement. This is how you did. Have a great year. So that's another aspirational. But something occurred to me as well that kind of gets off this topic, and you and I and many others listening are in areas where we have severe weather. What do you do when there's severe weather in terms of communication with the owners? Do you have a system in place for weather issues? And do the owners know what the expectation is? If, let's just use for an example, a hurricane comes to town, what is the expectation on communication? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, that's that's a part of a policy. And then more importantly, the owners need to know, but your staff also needs to know where their touch points are to the owners and that they're following that process. It's extremely important. I think it's, again, a policy, and you talk about that on the onboarding, but then also there needs to be direct communication. If there's any named storms, there's a process for that and how you send things out. And there also needs to be an understanding for owners that if you are hit by some type of natural disaster, the limitation to communication to those owners, because you're going to be flooded with thousands of calls, but we may not be able to get back to the area. So that trigger has to be in place as well.
And those communication lines may not exist. Internet may be down, telephone may be down, power may be out. So I think particularly prior to the storm, it is critical that you have that expectation set. Are you going to go and prepare every house for an oncoming hurricane, or is it going to be an on-demand thing? And the owner has to make their own arrangements with a vendor. Really important. And it can be the end of a relationship if you don't communicate that properly. So, and the last thing we had on the list, I'm going to defer to you. That's owner survey. This is another aspirational one for me. I have not done that. The owner survey for me is when they renew their agreement. I think we've done pretty good if they renew their agreement, but that's probably not the best.
So I actually have to give credit to my mom. She does this, and she actually works with a polling firm, and they're a fantastic firm out of Atlanta. And this is a part of their strategic plan. So they don't do it annually. They do it every couple of years. And it just gauges in general how not only owner satisfaction, but what the intention of the property is. Are they feel like they're making money? Do they want higher rates? They want higher occupancy. Are they planning on selling it? Is it getting too expensive? There are questions out there, but it's not specific to an owner. So she doesn't get exactly which owner has said what. And so it's full feedback of a portfolio, and it's really impressive on what she finds in there. And that directs not only her strategic plan and how she's soliciting owners, but how she's changing up her communication in her newsletters, in her property managers' communication to owners. It's a great driving force for her, but it's something she's done for years. And I have not been able to replicate, but I'll throw that in that aspirational communication and give her a shout out for it.
Love that. We did an owner survey in the past. One of the questions, try to keep it simple, in and out in 5 minutes. Obviously, that's one of the standards you want. You don't want to bog somebody down with something that's going to take them 30 minutes to fill out. But one of the key questions for us was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend me to a friend or neighbor who is looking for a rental management company? And if you don't get a 9s or 10s, well, you probably need to dive a little deeper and find out why.
That's really important to know.
And then, so the last section we have here for you on owner communication is, who owns those communications? Do you do it? Do you have somebody on staff that is designated who does this, or is it a group? I think that's really important to have a communications point, because the owner doesn't have time to guess who am I supposed to contact. Who's the maintenance guy again? The housekeeping person? Oh, I think they got a new one. Was her name Julie? That's just not good.
Yeah. And, Tim, this is also where I think we can miss the mark for owners and also for our staff. So part of you going back to that Ford method is you really have to understand not only what does the owner expect and want, but a property manager or a communications direct line who can provide that. So a lot of times what's easier if you have a larger company is you geographically put a property manager with a home, but that sometimes doesn't necessarily work. You need to really think about some of the personalities, to the point of the owner that we have that calls for 90 minutes. I have one staff member who would be willing to do that and can work with that personality. I have another staff member that does not jive well, and it's a personality. There's nothing wrong or right about it, but you have to make sure that the owner's feeling that they're heard, and then that also that a team member is not being bombarded with too many of those types of individuals, but can carry on a good relationship with that owner and meet those expectations.
I think more than anything, this particular section really speaks to how large your company is. If you have a smaller company, you're going to be nimble. Obviously, there's not going to be a lot of choices in terms of an owner communication, but as you grow larger, you do tend to get departments and tend to get silos. And so housekeeping doesn't always know what maintenance is doing, and maintenance doesn't always know what reservations is up to. So one of the solutions we came up with on this is a central number for owners to communicate. And that goes to several people who are responsible for owner communication, and also a central owner email box, rather than them getting an out of office reply to that person that they've always talked to, who is off for the next 2 days, but they need an answer right now. I remember a few occasions to this where I can't get a hold of so-and-so. They're never around when I call. And it turns out they call on Thursdays, and so-and-so is always off on Thursdays. So you're not going to get a hold of that person on Thursdays. And then the other one, with back to your point about weaning people off of communication, a lot of times those people that onboard the person, the recruiter, for lack of a better word, the business development manager, establishes that initial relationship with the property owner, but they have a difficult time handing that off to the person that's supposed to be dealing with it. And it became a real issue for us a couple of years ago, where, let's say this person's name is Sally, who is our onboarding person, and Sally would get the phone calls when there was a clogged commode or the bookings weren't just right. And then so Sally is in the middle of something that she shouldn't be in the middle of, and she had a very difficult time letting go because you had given them their personal cell phone number. And then when it did get handed off, we'd hear that, well, Sally promised us 2 free owner cleans. Those kinds of things. And then you go to Sally and she go, I did no such thing. I would never do that. But the reality is, if we had communicated properly and set the expectations, it wouldn't have been an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. That send off is really important. And I think that even more so, it helps with the internal team member relationships, because an individual who's out there soliciting and is a part of the business development is not going to have access to this, to your point, to the same ability to get the maintenance out or to move reservations as needed, or, they may be able to book a owner stay, but can't provide all of the other requests. And so they're very limited on that. And then there becomes an internal issue between an individual who that role and job is to take care of those tasks and someone else who's trying to figure it out. And that is really important, like, in the front, for us to explain what everyone's role is. And again, what the owner should expect from those individuals.
Can't emphasize that enough. That's so good. And then the other key to communication, I think, is when you do have those contact points and you do have a communication with a property owner, the follow-up with that property owner on communications to confirm the action that will be taken. Even if it's a short little email or a text or whatever the preferred method is with the property owner. Per our conversation earlier this morning, we're scheduling an owner departure cleaning on this date, and we're setting you up for the air filter change program for the next 6 months. Please let me know if I can do anything else for you. And then you have that, I'm sorry to say it, a get out of jail free card, or that it's not what you know, it's what you can prove in this business. And you have that email where you said, you know what, I told you on, April the 14th that this is what we were going to do. At least you have that going. Anything else on this communication stuff? We covered a lot in a little bit of time. We did go over our usual allotment, but I think people don't mind that much.
I hope people don't mind that much because I think it's such great information. I do want to mention one more thing, and I think it speaks more to inside the business, is a lot of people can either have highs or lows from their communication with owners, and making sure and checking in with your team, and no matter what position you're in, to try to take some of the load, because there are days where it is a little bit harder in some communications, and there's days where you're so excited about communication, but making sure that it's not one individual who has to bear all of the burden of the good and the bad news, because it becomes a little taxing. So figuring out solutions to make sure that every team member has some type of involvement, not necessarily from the communication, but making sure that the work is done and then communicated to the right people effectively is extremely important.
So we gave you a lot of questions here today. We hope you have answers to the questions we put out there about what type of communication, what do you know about your owners, who communicates, and of course, when you communicate. That'll do it for this time. What's up next, Tiffany? What are we going to bring to them the next time we get together?
Oh, I'm so excited. We are going to Savannah, Tim and I, and we're going to be sharing all the things we learn from their education from the VRMA's Frontline conference that they have there. So we are going deep dive. I have a couple of team members that are going with me, and I'm excited to see. This is the first time, I believe, right, that they've done something like this where it's the frontline operations. And I'm excited to see what they're going to be talking about and what all we'll be able to learn. And we're going to share that on our next podcast.
Absolutely. We're there right now as you're listening to this podcast. So come by and say hello to us if you haven't seen us, if you're there. But otherwise, look for us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or on our website. Everything's there at The Vacation Rental Key with T&T.com. That'll do it for this time. Thanks for listening, everybody. So long.
Bye, guys.